Hi, everybody. Just in case you're able to hear me, just to say we will get started in 4 minutes, if that's okay. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Lovely to be lovely of you to join me this evening. We are missing quite a few, so we may well find quite a few people joining us as we go on. But I've just wondered, just for a few moments, if you're able to turn on cameras, and then I promise you, you can virtually turn them off for the rest of the evening, basically, just to check that everybody's here. That would be brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, nice to see you, Sean. Thank you. Hi, Stephanie.
Sorry.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, my camera's not working very well. Something's wrong with it.
No, you look very blurred, Alex. Not your sparkling self, I'll tell you. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Can I just say then, just to put a context on this evening, is that okay? This is actually the second in a series of 3 sort of curriculum briefings I'm doing. They don't have to be interrelated, I promise you. So therefore, if you're joining me for the first time this evening, it's really a chance for you to be able to sort of pick up on where your school is at. Now, we've put these together deliberately as an opportunity for you to just check on where your curriculum is currently, to listen hopefully to what I have to say. Hopefully a lot of it will be you saying to yourselves, great, I think we've got that sorted quite nicely. And then actually, hopefully, perhaps offer 1 or 2 guidances for you on the way forward. This evening is very much focused on curriculum implementation. The first one, for those of you who are with me, we're very much around curriculum intent. Basically, it will sort of basically kind of help you recognize where you are. So when I currently go around schools, one of the issues I'm finding at the moment is that a lot of schools have done a lot of work on the curriculum intent, and indeed a lot of it is really, really good. What I am finding, however, that when I do a book look in the school, it doesn't always match the kind of the ambition that we have for the curriculum intent. So this evening, I'm just going to take you through, and we will be stopping every so often to give you a chance to ask me various questions, either through the chat facility or indeed live, if that's easier for you, to just pick up on where we were. And we're going to start off by just really looking at some of the first thing, basically, in terms of sequencing a unit of learning for the curriculum, and for you to really pick up with me from there. We're then going to go on again to look at substantive knowledge versus disciplinary knowledge, okay? And really, really try botting in that and just see where you are. I'm then going to move particularly looking within that disciplinary stuff at working scientifically and what that might mean in your school, to actually then look at potential opportunities for assessing disciplinary learning particularly, and also then finish off with looking a little bit at kind of some work I've been doing recently on art, which may be helpful to you. And then finally, basically, we're going to be looking at just teaching and learning very briefly. All of that will fit in nicely, I'm sure, before 5 o'clock to send you back on your way quite happily. So just bear with me while we just share the screen, if possible, please. Thank you. Okay, so Paul, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you are seeing some slides on the scene, please? And it gives me some sort of confidence that it's working there. Yeah, sorry. Paul, can you see some slides on the scene? Great, thank you, brilliant. So what I'm going to do for this first bit, if I may, is to just actually put together my first section, which is really looking at the implementation, as I said, and there's quite a few messages coming in, so just bear with me. Great, that's lovely. I can see where we are now, and we can just get going. Thank you very much. So my first slide basically is really talk about what I've tried to do in terms of looking at the research that's out there and why I've done this and how it's actually working for me currently. I've introduced into the schools I work with the whole idea of actually the link it, learn it, check it, show it, know it process of setting out a unit of learning. And what I'm trying to do is to really, really pick up on the current research that's out there. So in other words, if I'm actually writing a unit of learning for history, geography, and science particularly, that follows this precise process, okay? So the link it effectively is ensuring that every teacher is putting a lot of effort into prior knowledge of individual children. And in so doing, I'm really having an expectation that they are really doing this in a way that they understand about cognitive load theory and enabling the brain to be able to cope with the learning that's just about to come. So what I'm looking for at that stage is that teachers are recognizing how important this stage is in the learning process. Indeed, I go as far as to say to teachers, if you don't do the link it stage, practically anything else you do, it doesn't really matter because children won't remember it anyway. What we understand about the brain is if we can get children to ignite the learning in an area that they already know, that rest of the new learning should be that much easier for them. So within the link it stage, then we've got 3 processes to look at. One is obviously link within the subject. So if I'm doing some plants work, for instance, with year 3 children, I would be aware that children have already done some plants work in early years, year 1, year 2, and this bit of the section of the unit of learning is me ensuring they've had a chance to talk about the learning they already possess and how they understand things about plants before we introduce the new learning, which I think in year 3 off the top of my head for plants will be things like photosynthesis and so forth. Once I've established that, I may also need to check if in some cases that new learning or the previous learning may well be something that is from another subject. So for instance, I'll use the example of healthy living in year 2 in science, for instance, okay, where we're looking at children to help them understand about living healthily by exercising more often, by eating healthy food, by cleaning their teeth. All of those sort of features are the main part of the new learning in year 2. However, children from early years will have talked about healthy snacks. They will have actually probably done some PE in year 1 and in early years. So we link all of that, or help them to link all of that learning to the new learning that's about to come. And the third part of the process is to also acknowledge their own personal experiences. So if I'm actually doing some year 4 work, for instance, on the digestive system, not many children would be unable to point out roughly where their stomachs are on their body, okay? And roughly be able to tell you what happens to the food they eat, even if they can't go into the level of description we hope they will be able to after the new learning has been introduced. So what I'm actually saying is the linkage stage then is massively important. It doesn't always need to be the first lesson. It doesn't always need to be half a lesson. In some cases, it can be quite brief. In other cases, it may need to be a full lesson or so. That's determined by how heavy the new learning is going to be that comes later. So the new learning then is introduced in what I describe as from the group that were with me last time, I called it the composites and indeed the components that come with it. In other words, really being clear in my learning about what the big learning is, and also how the components of that learning are broken down, how we break that big learning into components and sequence them very carefully to ensure the learning actually follows a progress for the children. But I also introduced that check it process within that. So during the new learning, during the framework of the learning, I might throw 2 or 3 different 5-minute check-its in. Some of us call them hinge questions, okay, where we actually ask a question to check that all our children are really with us, and to enable those children that clearly are not with us to be given sort of the level of intervention that they need to enable them to carry on with the learning journey at that stage. So rather than just wait to the end, when very often it's too late to provide extra support, we use these check-its within the learning, perhaps at the end of the first lesson, end of the second lesson, or whatever, to really help you gauge the learning and understanding there is amongst the children in your class. The learn it and the check it then kind of is happening during the main part of the new learning. Right at the very end of the new learning, we introduce the thing called the show it, where we can do this in a range of different ways. And lately, I've come across more and more schools working with me, moving to actually getting children to do a really good mind map of the learning from that unit of learning. So for instance, in one of the schools I work with a lot, we've introduced almost something like a floor book, basically is the best way to describe it, an A3 ring-bound sort of black book where the children have an opportunity at the end of the learning to mind map, if you like. If they've done the Romans, they mind map everything they know about the Romans onto an A3 sheet of paper within the floor book. The beauty of that is that if we provide them, particularly if we provide them with gel pens to make it attractive and make it as sort of standing out as much as we can, the idea is that this goes with the child right through the key stage. So we'll have one for key stage 1, one for key stage 2, which the key stage 1 would include in early years, for instance, okay? And the idea basically at this stage is we get children to be able to really show us how much they know so far. And effectively, we then use that with a partner after, as part of the Know It section, okay, as well as the activities through retrieval that I'd be using with children at this stage. I'd also be using the mind map, and children sat together. Perhaps this week is my chance to explain it to Sian. Next week is Sian's opportunity to talk to me about the learning that's gone on in that area. So the whole idea of all of this basically is to create that sort of a scenario where we really get children to be clear at the end of the learning about what they've done, but also use that in future events basically to really help them, remind them of the key learning that's going on. That then becomes, as I said, part of the Know It section, which is the bit that happens after the learning's been completed. Sometimes it can be a term or 2 terms afterwards. Indeed, it can be even longer than that if you wish. Within that, as well as the A3 mind map, I'm suggesting that we could actually have at this stage some really nice retrieval activities, which last about 10 minutes long. Now, many of you will know that as part of my role, that I'm the kind of the chair of the trustees of the Focus Trust, which is a multi-trust academy of 15 primary schools. One of the things we introduced last year was to bring in the retrieval activities during the first 10 minutes on afternoons, on Tuesdays, Wednesday, and Thursday, every other week. So we were looking at Tuesdays was history, I think, Wednesdays say was geography, and Thursdays was science. And the activities that we were doing were short, sharp activities like give me 3, things like noughts and crosses, things like sort of true and false, those sort of areas. Cops and robbers would be another one that we do quite regularly to really gain a picture of the knowledge that children have. So basically then, what I'm trying to show is a very, very early start is in the implementation of the curriculum, having a process, doesn't need to be this one, doesn't need to be named in the way that I've got it here, but do you have a process that everybody in your school actually works to? Each of these areas here, I can assure you, can be justifiably supported by the research that's gone out there, okay? Now, I'm just going to leave that on the stage for a second, I'm going to leave that slide there for a few moments, okay? Just while I just pick up on 1 or 2 of the chats that's been going on, or 1 or 2 of the bits of information to me that's going on, and then hopefully what I'll do is to move on from there. So I'm just going to give 2 minutes for you to just assimilate what I've said, and also to if you want to ask specific questions around that for me, okay? Thank you. Right, Stephanie, answering your question here, basically it's about how does this flow book work in large schools. I see it working in the class basically for one class, and they could actually, if they need to, if there were 3 forms of entry, for instance, there's nothing wrong with a partner being at a later stage sharing that their flow book with other children. Now, unless I've actually sort of not really got the question properly, I see basically no problem in larger schools, because I do feel that what we do is really sort of work that in a kind of the I would have 1 book that would cover history, geography, and science if it was one of the standard size sort of flow books we have. The first third perhaps being history, the second third being geography, the third being science, and actually keep it going with them as they go through the key stage. Now, I think I'm getting you right there, but if not, please come back to me with another question about it. So one of the things I'm really sort of saying is that having a system, so basically just having a system, as far as I'm concerned, is really important here, that you see the learning go through a particular sequence if possible, okay? I'm just going to pick up again. I suspect there'll be more questions around that. No, it's not one book per class. It's one book for every child, I'm afraid. Okay, so we have a book for every child because their mind map of learning would be different to the child that's next to them, if you understand where I'm coming from. I hope that's okay, Stephanie. Sorry about my ambiguity in terms of the explanation there. I hope that's clearer to you now. Thank you. Okay, that's great. Thanks. Right, moving on from there, if I may, because I'm aware of sort of time and so forth. The next stage I want to check is something that I did touch on very much during the first. So those of you who were with me at the beginning of the curriculum one, briefing one, will perhaps recognize what I'm doing here, but I hope you'll also recognize that I'm just moving it on a little bit from last time. So effectively, it's that understanding of what we mean by substantive knowledge and what we mean by disciplinary knowledge. Now, I'm not aware, but I think I'm right in saying, if you're not aware already, you will definitely be getting a PDF of my presentation this evening. If that hasn't already been promised to you, it'll certainly be on its way to you by tomorrow. So effectively, what we're actually saying here is that substantive knowledge is something that is very specific to the knowledge that's being imparted around any given unit of learning, okay? So if I'm doing rivers with children, things like know what a tributary is and know what estuaries are would indeed be key substantive knowledge that I may wish for my children to take away. If I'm doing the unit of learning on the Romans, I might actually desperately want the children to know what the Romans did to improve Britain. Now, I can't use that if I'm doing the Vikings. I can't do that if I'm actually doing the Stone Age period of time. It only really comes from the knowledge the children will gain around the unit I'm delivering, okay? So for instance, as an example here, knowing the parts of a plant or parts of a tree is very specific to that unit of learning within the science curriculum. And in that case, basically, I'm talking about it, not something necessarily I'd expect them to develop as they move through. Knowing the techniques used by Van Gogh or the techniques used by Monet in their sort of pieces of artwork would be something that's very specific to that artist or to those artists as we actually go through. On the other hand, the disciplinary knowledge is something that really enables our children to become historians, geographers, scientists, artists, technologists, etc., etc. And things like that we will need to return to whatever the unit is. And that's kind of understanding the difference or appreciating the difference between long ago and very long ago. In history, for instance, anything we do with timelines by and large is a disciplinary study because we come back to timelines again and again and again. Similarly, in geography, mapping is a massive part of the disciplinary knowledge because we will use different maps in different contexts at different times for our children. So kind of in history again, understanding the importance of propaganda and censorship, and sometimes recognize that they might have been necessary is part of the disciplinary knowledge we want our children to gain. Similarly, using evidence in science, okay? Being able to look at information, be it an artifact, be it a photograph, and begin to glean information from there, just like a historian would, and actually recognize that very, very often our understanding of history is not 100% certain. There may be areas that we might need to look at, which gives us a quality that we need. So for instance, recently, archaeologists, for instance, have changed their views of what mummies or why people were mummified during the ancient Egyptian period. It's recognizing that these will actually change as more information perhaps becomes available to us. The other side, on the history side, is obviously appreciating the difference between primary and secondary sources of evidence. As I said earlier, in the geographical side, it's actually using something like an OS map, okay? Hopefully children will use OS maps again and again and again in their everyday life, not just being specific to the unit of learning that we're actually doing. And similarly, basically recognizing that, that the sort of sketches that we do in the field work in geography, we would be getting better and better and better at our sketch work because we need to use it later on in geography at a much more sophisticated level than we might be, say, in a year one class and so forth. Also, working scientifically, anything to do with working scientifically, by and large, is actually a disciplinary activity, because we are using a set of skills that we can use again and again in other cases, okay? Now, I'm sorry if I'm sort of talking to the converted here in terms of where we are, but what I want to do is to just very briefly take you through, for instance, in science, in history, sorry, one of the things I really labor with children is this business about bias, propaganda, censorship, exaggeration, speculation, inaccurate conclusions, obviously primary and secondary sources as well. These are the things that really, if you like, we need to get underneath the surface with children. So for instance, okay, I do lots of this type of thing, where if I was studying the ancient Egyptians, I might, having really taken children through some of the kind of the being careful about how we use information and take everything at face value, I might get them to think about, why do we have to be careful about studying history from a long time ago? I might even go as far as helping them to think of a scale from a 1 to 10 as to how reliable the information is when we're actually teaching them about the ancient Egyptians, okay? It's that sort of thing, basically, that I really now bring into our curriculum much, much earlier than I might have actually done before. It's interesting, actually, because when you look at the papers from Ofsted, these subject-specific papers, the famous leaked papers, as we call them, from the other day, many of us will recognize that in Ofsted's term, they actually recognize they're really looking for this in Key Stage 2 more so than Key Stage 1. However, I have to say that from my particular perspective, I would expect a lot of this happening in Key Stage 1. For instance, the famous one is the Great Fire of London, and how reliable is the information, because much of it comes from one source, okay? It's getting children into the habit of thinking about, yeah, okay, we anything from a long time ago, we've got to be very careful about, okay? I'm working from there. If I'm looking, however, more specifically, here's an example from one of the units of learning that I've been doing recently. This is my kind of learning on the unit I've written on how did Britain change between the beginning of the Stone Age and the end of the Iron Age, normally sort of delivered by year 3. I make a big thing of introducing Skara Brae and indeed Stonehenge. In the case this evening, we're just looking at Skara Brae. I would actually tell them a little bit about Skara Brae, get them to understand how important the find was, okay, recognize its importance in the terms of history, and then I would actually really go as far as to give them a whole range of photographs, not on one page as I've done here, I hasten to say, but giving children a chance to really look at these, blow them up into quite large A4 size at least, and really ask them the question, so what do I now understand about what living or what life must have been like for people during this particular time, okay? And it's that sort of thing, getting them to be historians, really getting them, and then when they've had a chance to look, recording them under, yeah, I can say this for certain about the way they live. Not absolutely sure about this lot, but I can't really say for certain, but I have a good idea that that probably happened. But I certainly know this didn't happen, or they didn't do this, okay? That style of sort of working in history is what we're expected to do under, if you like, really taking that level of disciplinary learning or knowledge right through to its sort of end source. Now, that kind of process then is something I've been doing quite a lot of recently. In geography, and I did share this last time, so forgive me for repeating, one of the things I do is to really have kind of mapping ideas in place. So in Key Stage 1, for instance, okay, if I'm using maps to navigate, these are the sort of maps I would use with children, okay? In Key Stage 2, it's more lower Key Stage 2, sorry, that one for upper Key Stage 2 should be a bit further down. These are the maps I would use for different age groups. If I'm actually looking at maps to describe landscapes, this is what I might be using with Key Stage 1. This is what I might be using with lower Key Stage 2, and again using with upper Key Stage 2, okay? Moving on to making maps, might get early years children sort of I'd be kind of happy with getting this type of map to represent what they've got there in early years. Key stage 1, we can see we begin to move into a little bit more sophistication. By the time we're in lower key stage 2, I expect quite a lot of my children when it comes to mapping out something. And look at where I am in year 5 and 6, recognizing basically that they are beginning to use a perspective, etc., within their drawing and so forth. Okay. Now, just a kind of a point here, I have to say to you, using these as exemplars has helped me enormously to really move things on in several sort of cases. So in other words, I'm raising the bar for many of the children when I'm showing them the expectation I have for their drawing, particularly in year 5 and 6. I have to say that's been really good to shift that on. The other thing here is to just say again, sketching in fieldwork terms, okay? This is again some examples of what I'd expect in kind of from reception coming into and up to year 2. And then note here the kind of level, if I'm doing some river study, perhaps with year 6 children, fieldwork drawings would be up to this with annotation being clearly used in this case to help them understand a little bit more than we might otherwise have been doing in the past, okay? If you notice on the top there, my year 3-4, where perspective isn't as good yet, okay? I'm happy with that to come from year 3 and 4. So what we're trying to do is deal with the area that indeed the Geographical Association and indeed Ofsted has been highly critical of us in primary schools. And that's the fieldwork from children, and indeed the sketching during fieldwork by children has in the past perhaps not been at a high enough level, okay? And so the reason I'm showing you this is one idea is to use exemplifications such as these with our children to help them understand the level at which I'm expecting their drawings or sketches to be. There are some others here, which I'll run through quickly, gathering field information, for instance, okay, on that one. Then we move on to science, and this is the third area really I want to discuss with this afternoon. I will actually stop after this because it's all part of the same area around disciplinary knowledge, okay? Now, one of the things I am finding on my travels around schools is where I'm being critical is where teachers are over scaffolding the working scientifically side of things, okay? In other words, they are providing children with the resources, or they're providing them often with almost the answers in terms of investigations and experiments they carry out. Or even when they're doing some research, they're guiding them too much. And I think basically one of the things that we are in danger of doing is forgetting that science learns from its mistakes, okay? Talk to the children about the vaccination around the pandemic, for instance, okay? And recognize they didn't get the vaccine in the first attempt. It took lots of readjustments, thousands in actual fact, before the vaccine became able to be actually shared with everybody out there. So in actual fact, what we're really looking at, this is kind of an example, if you like, of knowing how line travels in straight lines. I use this method with children to start with, okay? So if my experiment is to show, as you can see in this experiment here, is to find out from the previous internet, set up your own experiment to show that light travels in a straight line, okay? So children have seen something to really support them, but the next stage for me is to provide them with this. So all my working scientifically, for what it's worth, follows this process here. This is what I call the metacognitive process to learning, okay? And I bring that in by getting children in the first instance to really clarify what the investigation is all about, okay? I get them to consider which part of this investigation may be more difficult than others. Where is it that they might find themselves finding some more difficulty than others, okay? What do they already know about what they're going to look at? In this case, obviously, how light travels, okay? And basically, the other type of thing is, have they gathered the right resources to complete the task they've been given? Did their partner agree with their ideas, okay? And did they give time for their partner to talk to them? How much of their original idea remains after the talk has gone, particularly if they're in a group of 4. So my first part is to get children to recognize that as a really important part of the learning, not just the end product, but the thinking that went into it in the first place. When they're actually working on the doing stage, okay, I'm really talking here about getting children to be brave enough to say to themselves, do we think we're going in the right direction? Do we need to rethink here and actually alter our first ideas? So many children know basically that they're setting up something that isn't necessarily going to work, that they kind of carry on relentlessly, even though if they know that right from the very, very early stages. Again, have they given serious consideration to a better way? Okay. Are they prepared to stop halfway and reconsider things? Again, what are they learning about themselves as they're actually carrying out this investigation? And are they really recognizing that they've listened to their partners? Are they prepared to listen to their partners? Are they prepared to defer to other people when indeed the investigation may need somebody else's view rather than their own? Then the evaluation stage for me is where they kind of tell me what's actually happened as a result of what they've done. Included in this, of course, would be, did the investigation go the way we wanted? What did we actually learn? What can we actually do to find out? Now, the important thing for me is that's written up in that stage. So I go away from apparatus, method, result, and all that sort of thing in science. I go down this road because for me, for what it's worth, not saying the others is wrong, I'm just saying for me, this method works. It means that the children genuinely go through that planning stage by talking to each other, by gathering their own resources, by thinking through the problem, okay? The doing stage for me is where they really talk about what was going on during the setting up of the investigation or experiment. And the last bit really is telling us what happened as a result of it all. So kind of that with the diagram that might come from there would indeed, for me, be quite an important part of the whole process, okay? So kind of what I'm trying to get across here is the recognition for me that within the disciplinary side of the learning, I think we've gone so far. You may think, yeah, we're happy with that, Clive. We can really see, we really feel comfortable in our school as to where we were, but I'm kind of challenging you to think, is it happening consistently? Is it happening everywhere? Do we need to rethink where we're going with it all? And do we need to move it to that next level? I have no doubt. So please don't think I'm talking of, oh gosh, it's not good enough entirely. What I am actually saying is, could we actually bring a bit more polish on what we're doing currently? Okay, so I'm just going to stop the share at that stage, if I may, and again invite either comments from yourselves or indeed kind of just put something on the chat if you want to, if that's easier for you to work there. So I'm just going to stand still almost for 2 minutes to allow you to digest that basically and to offer any comments if you so wish. Okay, I'm now going to carry on, and this stage basically is looking at assessing disciplinary learning and hopefully just providing you with some resources that may be worth having as a starting point if you feel that you need to go further in this direction. So I'm going to start by just sharing with you the obvious things. This is kind of looking at disciplinary knowledge in history, okay? This is showing, in my case, there are lots of people that have broken the chronology, causation. Lots of people go down a concept route, etc. for this. That's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. This is the way I've done it. It's really saying, look, I put the chronology and causation together. I've really looked at it from early years through to year 1 and 2, and then into 3, 4, 5, and 6, okay? I've then got historical inquiry, starting with early years, moving through to year 6. And my final bit, basically, is significance and interpretation. Now, lots of people, as I've said, have separated those. Absolutely brilliant. No problem at all. Please don't change. I've just happened to put them into these 3 groups, okay? And it kind of works for me when I feel about needing to look at where children are. However, one of the things I've also done, I should have said about the geography as well. I didn't realize these were on, but here it is for me in geography, okay? The disciplinary knowledge I want children to acquire in geography set out from years 1 to 6. There are other excellent examples out there, so don't think this is just me. This is genuinely me starting off and trying to review this as I go through, okay? But what I wanted to show you was this, okay? One of the things I've done recently is to look basically more directly at how do I go around assessing disciplinary knowledge. What I've done is to try and combine what I'm looking for, and I've started here with year 3. I promise you that there will be a year 1 and 2, so this is kind of something in the making at the moment. So what I've done is to say, right, okay, I want children by the end of year 3 to use a variety of sources to collect information about the past. And you notice there, I've said at least 2 of them, sorry, being primary, at least 2, with 1 of them being primary, sorry, another perhaps being secondary sources, okay? And I would anticipate that they've got the capability and ability to look at historical books, to make some sort of views or to bring sort of views from there, look at things like internet links, BBC Bitesize particularly, or something equivalent, and come up with some sort of original thoughts about what they're looking at, and also looking at artifacts, basically, which I think would really help them in this case. Now, in some cases, if it's Victorian, we might have the real artifact, okay? But in terms of Egyptians, it might be a replica of the Egyptian necklace, for instance, okay? Rather than a printout of the necklace. The second area I would expect for year 3 is for them to suggest sources of evidence for a selection to help answer questions and say how it can be used to find out about the past. So kind of being able to evaluate which is and which is not, which is not a good source will be a starting point for me. Justification of why they've chosen what they've chosen, the source they've actually chosen, and why they may not have chosen others, and asking the question of does the sources they choose help to answer the question? If not, why not? Okay, that style of sort of working together is what I'm after. Really seeing, are they capable of finding the right questions or finding the right things at the right time? And finally, the third one in year 3 is to explain that there is a different type of evidence sources that can be used to help explain that there are different types of evidence sources that can be used to help represent the past. And again, there's the 3 bullet points there below. Recognize the need to look beyond one source of evidence sometimes, okay? Explaining that our knowledge of ancient past relies very heavily on artifacts, and know that archaeologists have supported much of this knowledge over the past sort of centuries or so, okay? Then in year 4, what I'm looking at is creating opportunities to find out if children do appreciate the difference between primary and secondary sources, okay? Their understanding of what a primary source is as against what a secondary source is becomes really important here. But recognizing also that sometimes secondary sources, although valuable, we might need to be more cautious with, okay? They should be able to explain all of that to me if they really are a historian who's working at the right level by the end of year 4, okay? The second bit is to use a range of sources to collect information about the past, which is similar to what's in year 3, except we're bringing in the comparison of primary and secondary sources more shall we say, definitely in this area, okay? Recognize that some sources of information would be more valuable than others would be another aspect here. Construct informed responses about one aspect of life, okay, would be another thing that I hope that they'll be able to do by the end of year 4. By the end of year 5, we got 4 in this one, recognizing when you're using primary and secondary sources for information to investigate the past. Select relevant sections of information to address historically valid questions and conduct details-informed responses. Use a wide range of different evidence to collect information about the past, and devise questions about change, cause and consequences, similarity and difference, and significant people or events in a wider context, okay? I won't go through the bullet points for you. If you feel this is helpful to you, this will come to you as a PDF, and hopefully you'll be able to make use and develop this even further for your own sake. And finally, in year 6, it's a case of using a wide range of different evidence to collect evidence, there's 2 evidence there about the past, okay, such as ceramics, pictures, documents, printed sources, posters, online material, all of those things basically, are they capable and able to use that level of information to really help them find out more, okay? Investigating their own lines of inquiries, this time by posing historically and valid questions to answer, and then understanding the complexity of people's lives in the past and how some societies are different due to the changes and challenges that they've actually had, okay? Now, the other bit that I feel might be helpful for you is in the science world, and this time, thankfully, I have done them from year 1, because when we're looking at working scientifically in the national curriculum, many of you will know that year 1 and year 2 are put together. And then what we have in both year 1 and 2 are the list of things, the 6 issues on the left-hand side. So in the national curriculum, under working scientifically for year 1, you will find children able to ask simple scientific questions, children able to use simple equipment to make observations, children able to carry out simple tests, okay? Children able to identify and classify things, children able to explain to others what they found out, and children able to use simple data to answer questions. Not surprisingly, if I just move on for a second, that's exactly what it is for year 2 as well, okay? Because year 1 and 2 are put together. What I've attempted to do here is to say, okay, so if a child is expected to ask simple scientific questions, what type of questions should I expect from them, okay? So here, for instance, why are flowers different colors, okay? Why do some animals eat meat and others do not? So is that type of sort of level of questioning I'd want from year 1, as against year 2, which might be, why do some trees lose their leaves in autumn and others do not? How long are roots of tall trees? Why do some animals have underground habitats, okay? Now, what I've tried to do here is to link these with the kind of levels of units of learning that's actually happening in years 1 and indeed years 2. I won't go through all of them. You can see what I'm trying to do. And then by year 3, you can see it's much more, because this is just one of 2 pages. And again, the left-hand side is there in the national curriculum. So it's not me making that up. It's there in the national curriculum. And of course, it's there for year 3 and year 4, okay? So you'll notice on both of these, the left-hand column are exactly the same, because that's what it is in the national curriculum. So what I'm now trying to do, okay, is the level of questioning I'd want from my children. You know, you've got this for year 1 and 2. What does that look like in year 3? And I'm suggesting things like, why does the moon appear to be in different shapes in the sky? Okay, why does my shadow keep changing during the day? Where does a fossil come from? And I hope you recognize again, I'm trying to link that with year 3 science work that's going on to make it easier for you to deal with. If I'm looking at year 4 then, okay, why are steam and ice the same thing? Okay, why is the liver important in our digestive system? And what do we mean by pitch when it comes to sound? Those are the types of question which are hierarchically, I hope you agree with me, as we actually go through, okay? And similarly, for year 5 and 6, we have got here a set of expectations which are exactly the same for both year groups. On the left-hand side, again, they're all the same. So if I go back to, again, know how to plan different types of scientific inquiry is the first thing they've got here. I set up the investigation when it's appropriate, okay? Finding materials that dissolve or not. I set up a fair test when needed, e.g. which surfaces create most friction. I set up an inquiry base, etc., and work from there. Now, if you can see what I'm trying to do is to really provide you with a more distinct breakdown of those expectations. That's fine. And basically what I'm trying to look at is exactly how that would actually work. Is that okay? So please just accept these as kind of my attempt to put those in some sort of order for you. So if I just stop there for a moment, okay? And with the history, but I am also going to show you these so you can talk. Sorry, I will move on just for a second, if I may, because I'd like you to just link with them. I'm just aware of time as much as anything else. One of the other things I've done recently is to really focus on drawing and painting in art and design, mainly because, if I'm being absolutely honest with you, I still think it's a disappointing outcome when I look at sketchbooks, etc., in schools. So the first bit is looking at drawing, okay? And I've used this process, so hopefully it would make it easier for teachers to understand what we're trying to get at. So for instance, okay, in the nursery, not surprisingly, there isn't any prior learning within our school, I hasten to say, in case you're having a go at me for thinking they come with absolutely nothing. What I am saying is the new learning we'd expect them to pick up in nursery are those set out in those 3 bullet points. I've also got the what does that success look like? The future learning reminds the teacher in nursery of what we hope they'll be able to do by the end of reception. We provide them with a key vocabulary. We provide some references for them as well, so we can see what those expectations are. And then endpoints are very clearly outlined here, where it's actually kind of appropriate. We put in a few artists there that might help in this area. So what I've done is to do that all the way through. I've only done this to year 4, okay? The reason I haven't done year 5 and 6 is simply I haven't got around to it yet, so bear with me, okay? So what am I trying to do here then? Well, basically what I'm trying to do is to raise the standard of expectation in drawing and indeed painting in art, okay? And kind of also making the point that alongside this, I'm going to create a whole set of expectations by taking some photographs of artwork that I think fits the bill for a typical reception site to create a moderation, an exemplification file, if you like, where this will be the front page and the exemplifications will follow, which I hope will be a massive step up in enabling you to be more accurate in assessing artwork in terms of the level at which we should expect it to be. I'm also including in that actually sketching and drawing that I find in history, geography, and science books, which can sometimes be quite disappointing in comparison to the artwork I've seen in the same school. So what I've got in front of you, as I said to you, it goes up to year 4 for drawing. As you can see the what success looks like, what the future learning looks like has already been identified for year 5, so sort of goes up to year 5 from that point of view. And then the kind of things I'd hope to see. And then similarly for painting, okay, starting from nursery and moving through. Now, the reason I'm sharing these with you this evening is specifically because I think they could potentially develop that exemplification file for you, if you haven't already got one, to link that with your assessment processes, which I think is quite a positive way of looking at assessment in in art particularly, which is an awfully difficult one because it's so subjective. I do accept there will be some elements of subjectivity still involved in it all, okay? But what I've tried to do with the examples I've shown in the questioning for history, the discipline side in science, and this element of art, okay? I'm trying to deal with kind of assessment issues for you as much as I'm able to. So that's kind of what I wanted to do at this session. And again, I'm just going to do the same as I've done before, but just stopping at this stage. And just, if you want to ask something, please feel free to do so. Okay, thank you very much. So what I will do is then just move on to the next slide. Actually, if I go back, sorry, just trying to do this the right way. Okay, sorry about this. And the final part, basically, I want to really share with you this evening is actually, sorry, is use this chart with you. This is something I've been using recently to help us really lift the quality of implementation of the curriculum by really focusing on the quality of teaching and learning in classrooms. And what I've tried to do, and this, for those of you who are not into your football, you may hate this, and understandably so. For those of you who know football, you'll probably recognize the footballer called Erling Haaland, who plays for Manchester City. He arrived this year, and for those of you who are not in the know, basically, what he has done is almost sort of revolutionized the football that's been played in the Premier League, because he happens to be already scoring more goals halfway through a season than the highest person scored last season. So he's kind of looked at as a very, very special player indeed. And I took that kind of opportunity of saying, how could we be, how could we be the next great teacher, okay? What is it that currently would actually underpin using the framework as we know it from Ofsted, all the sort of stuff that I've actually talked about with you over this session and the last session? How can we actually begin to recognize what we're looking at here? So for me, basically, I've looked at 5 things, well, 6 if you count the outcomes, which I'll come to in a minute, and really sort of said, look, for me, is that understanding neuroscience, okay? Now I think it's imperative to be a great teacher. You do need to understand that relationship between long and short-term memory, okay? And recognize the importance that has in the context of this. We need to know why we're activating prior knowledge and therefore being more secure in our teaching, okay? So the questions I might ask myself as a teacher, how does the brain work? How does this impact upon my daily, day-to-day teaching? How much time should I spend on prior knowledge? Maybe sort of questions that good teachers, I hope, would be asking themselves, okay? The second bit for me is, are we actually spending enough time on gathering the research out there that helps us to be even better at our job? Now, I mean that at different levels, okay? So it could be research generally as a senior leader in the school, or it could be a subject-specific research for a subject leader, or it could be as a classroom teacher that I'm making better use of my PPA to be absolutely 100% ready to deliver the next unit of learning. For instance, as an example, I wrote a unit of learning for the Mayans recently, and I literally did quite a bit of research on the Mayans. What I actually ended up with was a very different unit of learning for the Mayans as a result of what I'd learned from my research, okay? And that, what I'm trying to get at is, there is that level of discipline within us. Have we got it? Do we recognize that research becomes part of PPA, okay? And it may be the PPA I have before I deliver a new unit of learning after half term or into the next term or something, okay? That style of sort of thinking is what I would consider to be that little bit of difference between that greatness in teaching and just being a really solidly good teacher, okay? The third area I've picked up on is understanding the difference between substantive and disciplinary knowledge at the level I think that I've tried to explain it this evening, okay? Not just having a progression map for every subject, which is brilliant, which is almost a given, okay? But actually really knowing what those expectations are on a year by year. So that's one of the reasons I broke up the science, for instance, into year 1, year 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, with the questions I think give you a kind of a bit of differentiation between each of those groups, although they're given to us in the national curriculum purely together, okay? And realistically speaking, am I confident with using substantive and disciplinary knowledge? Am I confident that I'm developing my children as historians, geographers, artists, etc., etc.? And kind of, are you really developing children so that they think like a historian, speak like a historian, write like a historian, okay? Or geographer, or artist, or scientist, whatever, in those sort of areas, okay? So that kind of sort of bit there is massive. The next bit is the physical and emotional environment I create in my classroom. We've got 2 people from Fairfield here this evening. Alex, I know very well, and Vicky, who's unfortunately had to leave us now, I think. But basically, as soon as I walk into Fairfield Primary School in Widnes, I'm absolutely amazed by that level of calmness that immediately exists because of the fact they've really committed to using Hessian as their main covering everywhere, which I think actually takes away a lot of children's cognitive load by not dealing with too many kind of stimuli all at once. That's part of our understanding about extraneous cognitive load, obviously, and we need to look a little bit further into that. But alongside that, obviously, there is this massive thing going on at the moment with children's mental health, okay? And recognizing the importance in really creating an emotional environment in our classroom that really is just right for them. On the planning side then, what we're really understanding is, do we understand that composite component idea, that the big learning has to be there, okay? And really that we don't vary away from that. As a teacher and as children, we know what the big learning's about. And are the components set out in such a way that supports children getting to that big learning, okay? The last bit basically then is knowing the components are in the correct sequence, okay? See how that unit of learning belongs to the bigger picture, okay? And understand about cultural capital and why we're doing what we're doing with the children that we have in our school, okay? Those kind of requirements then, for me, from the right teacher, would really focus more on the outcomes in children's books, okay? We may well know exactly what we want from children, okay? And that we're maximizing that knowledge of teaching to really help children be much better at actually supporting the learning that's been going on in your classrooms. So kind of what I've been doing is using this particular slide literally as the focus of a staff meeting. I only use this with the staff. Obviously, I've sped you through it in a kind of 6 or 7 minutes this evening. But what I'm really sort of saying to you, I try desperately to make this the focus of really getting teachers back to talking, about the bread and butter bit of their job. Does that make sense? Okay, the classroom, their ability to really transform what children are able to do and learn because of the way they set about doing it. Now, again, I'm very happy to see if you felt it was useful for you to use that in your classroom for that sort of effect, okay? So folks, what I'm trying to do this evening is hopefully get you to think about where you are currently in school. I'm sure there were aspects of what I said this evening that made you feel really good because we're already doing that, okay? But I'm hoping also within there may be a little bit of promotion of this, that, and the other that has helped you think that little bit more deeply about one of the two things that we've been doing. Okay, so thanks very much for tuning in at this time, and thanks very much. And I hope that, as I said, by tomorrow at the latest, you should have a PDF version of this particular slideshow that I've actually used this evening. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody. Have a good evening and hope to pick up with you soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Clive. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.